Well, I got it completely wrong in 2016. But if you look at the data, it seems clear that Vice President Biden is quite a long way ahead. All of the data I can see points to his victory, but burned by 2016, no one is saying that they're going to put their head on the block and absolutely guarantee it.
If Joe Biden does win, as the polls suggest, would that actually be good news for the United Kingdom? Do you think he values the special relationship?
I think he values the UK, but he's a serious person who will follow the power. And what he knows is that when it comes to the COVID crisis, when it comes to the climate challenge, which he's put very high on the agenda, when it comes to some of the major global issues, he can see that in Paris, in Berlin, and in Brussels, you've got 27 countries working closely together. And there's no question in my mind that for the Biden camp, Brexit has reduced the influence of the UK. So yes, he will be warm towards the UK, but he will also be very realistic about the kind of issues that we are still struggling with and about his urgency for getting things done. And so I think that puts a special premium on the British government, not just to get the trade deal with the European Union, but also to sort out the ways in which we are going to cooperate on security terms, on intelligence terms, on foreign policy terms with the European Union, which is something that really has made so little progress, and that really leaves us in a weaker position.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because Biden, of course, has said that he would have voted Remain. He said that he's regretted the decision. Do you think that he may actually value other European partners ahead of the UK then?
Well, I think that when it comes to something like the climate challenge, the European Union is one of the top three global players. European Union, America, China are the deciders on the climate challenge. The European Union's set out €1 trillion plan for decarbonising the European economy. That's a major plank of the Biden promise, and he wants to see that as a way of engaging the Chinese as well. Now, Britain is hosting the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention in November. That's an important element of our diplomacy. But the danger, obviously, is that we're there organising the meeting, but not actually making the decisions.
Should we really be hoping for a Donald Trump victory then? I mean, he's somebody who's been much more supportive of Brexit. He's talked about the value of the special relationship. He's also said that the United Kingdom would be at the front of the queue for that all-important trade deal.
I mean, it's interesting because we can now judge President Trump on actions, not just words, and I don't think anyone believes that he's anything other than utterly transactional in the way he does his business. And what we know from the last year, since the transition from our membership of the European Union started, what we know from the 4 years since the referendum, when he's been president, is that the EU-US trade deal is going nowhere for a very simple reason. The needs and the values and the interests of British consumers are incompatible with the needs, values, and interests of American agriculture. That's just a massive stumbling block. It's the reason why there isn't an EU-US trade deal as well as a UK-US trade deal. So I think in the event of a Trump victory, the big question for Britain becomes, does he really mean what he says about neglecting NATO? Does he really mean what he says about confrontation with China in every area of international life? Because obviously the current British government has set out positions on a range of issues that aren't the same as the Trump position. And so I think that if President Trump is re-elected, then democratic countries in Europe are going to find some big questions about how they engage internationally when the US doesn't want to engage multilaterally.
At the same time, they're going back to the all-important UK-US trade deal, one of the priorities, of course, for any British government working with the new president. At least with Donald Trump, we've got someone who says that he wants to make it happen, putting us at the front of the queue. With Joe Biden, all of the same obstacles would remain, but he's also raised concerns over things such as the internal markets bill. We know, as you say, he's not a fan of Brexit either. And he's not exactly, you would say, a natural ally of Boris Johnson. So from that perspective, do you think a trade deal would be more likely under Donald Trump?
Look, my experience of this is that these leaders, they in the end work with the hand that they're dealt. Whatever President Biden, if he becomes President Biden's views of the British Prime Minister, he's going to deal with him in a respectful and serious way. So I wouldn't get too much caught up in the personality politics. I do think there are questions for the Prime Minister about how he shows that he can be a real partner.
Talking about those global issues, Donald Trump, of course, has been criticised for his foreign policy, but at the same time, he stood up to China. He has engaged with North Korea. All of this without starting a war, unlike other previous presidents that you could think of. Should he not be given a bit more credit?
I think that the credit for President Trump is that he's done what he said he would do. He said he had no interest in international multilateral alliances, and he's shown he meant it by pulling out of the Paris Agreement. He said that he was going to make others pay for things rather than America pay for it. He's followed through on that. He said he doesn't believe in climate change, and he's shown that by pulling out of the climate treaty. I don't happen to agree with those things, but I think that's where, if you want to offer quote unquote credit in your word, you'd offer that. I think, though, a sober-minded assessment would also say Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon today than it was 4 years ago. The North Korean engagement has not led to progress. And when it comes to engagement with China, obviously American farmers and consumers have paid the price of the tariffs that have come in. And China is actually in a much stronger position today than it was 4 years ago.
Now, I'm keen to ask you as well about anti-Semitism, because, of course, this is the week in which the Equality and Human Rights Commission found the Labour Party had acted unlawfully when dealing with complaints of anti-Semitism. How shameful is this for Labour?
You can't think of anything more shameful, really, than to be found to be colluding, conniving in what is essentially racist behaviour or actions. And so this is painful, this is shameful. As Keir Starmer said, I think he used that word for every member of the Labour Party. And it's a stain that has to be erased with absolute drive and determination. And so I think that I reflect on the fact I never felt that when I was a member of Parliament for South Shields or when I was Foreign Secretary, no one said, oh, he's a Jewish member of Parliament, he's a Jewish Foreign Secretary. And what's happened in the Labour Party after Jeremy Corbyn got elected was that a series of people came in or felt empowered to be able to challenge people on the basis of tropes about their religion, which is an absolute disgrace. And I think it must be an absolutely central part of public life to challenge that. And that seems to me what Keir Starmer is now doing. But it's work in progress, as Jeremy Corbyn's response to the EHRC report on Thursday showed.
Is it right that Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended?
Yes, definitely. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's response showed all of the blindness, all of the arrogance, all of the sticking of your fingers in your ears that we'd seen in his time as leader. And essentially, he suspended himself from the Labour Party and from the Labour whip in the House of Commons. I think he put himself beyond the pale. And it's essential that he shows that he's willing to come within the pale.
What I suppose I'm struggling to get my head around is that Jeremy Corbyn is now no longer fit to be a Labour MP. He's been suspended because of his reaction. Why was it that members of the Shadow Cabinet were less than a year ago campaigning for him to be Prime Minister, asking people to give them their votes? I mean, there's nothing essentially new in the report, is there? Do you think the Shadow Cabinet need to be taking, or the former Shadow Cabinet, people like Keir Starmer now, need to be taking a hard look at why they didn't do more?
Well, I think that the report did actually say some new things and show some new things about political interference. So I think it's important not to downgrade the report. I also think that the way Keir and Angela Rayner have been speaking so plainly this week about their reflections on the past only speaks well for them. I mean, the truth about the Jeremy Corbyn leadership is that he was never going to get elected as Prime Minister. We feared that he would get slaughtered in 2017, but he was just defeated, although many seats were held by a fraction. And he was slaughtered in 2019 with the worst result that Labour has had since 1935. He was never going to get elected as Prime Minister, but it was essential to get as many Labour MPs who are able to represent their constituents. And so I think this is a moment when it's time for the kind of steely determination, that steely leadership that Keir Starmer has shown to be supported. And I think that's what I sense around things. I've obviously not come from a position of the hard left in my politics. I've always been more on the centre left, and I've had disagreements with those on the hard left. But never in my worst thoughts did I think that the hill that they would choose to fight on would be the hill of anti-Semitism. I mean, they've put themselves beyond the pale. And I think the hard questions, frankly, are for them.
At the same time, though, you say that Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner have been, showing that steely leadership now, speaking out now, but they still campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister at a time when, although we may not have known all the details, we did know that there were issues over the way the Labour Party had dealt with anti-Semitism. I mean, would you have served in his shadow cabinet?
Well, I'm afraid that there's very little chance that he would have asked me to serve in his shadow cabinet. So I can honestly say that is a question I've never really had to focus on. I mean, I don't think he wanted anything to do with people of my political stripe. I mean, that's one of the problems of his leadership, was the sectarianism that he applied to it. So I think this isn't really about me. This is about learning a very simple lesson. And frankly, it links to the Biden conversation we're having. If you have a candidate who attracts people, you can win elections and put your values into practice. If you have a candidate like Jeremy Corbyn who repels voters, you've got no chance of being able to put your values into practice. And that is the tragedy of British politics over the last 10 years. Obviously, I was in a government which was defeated 10 years ago at the polls. And the tragedy of the last 10 years is that from 2017, 2019, British people felt they didn't have a proper choice. And it must be right, and it must be healthy, and it must be good, not just for people like me who are members of the Labour Party, but for the country, to have an opposition that is worth its salt. And that's what I hope that Keir Starmer will be able to bring into practice.